Welcome back to the 10 Adventures podcast. This week, we're revisiting a topic we haven't talked about since episode number 3 back in the middle of the pandemic in 2021. That episode, like today, was talking about how the Appalachian Trail can change your life. Back in 2021, we were talking to Charles DeMont, and today I'm really excited to introduce author Sally Chaffin Brooks, and she's going to talk about her new book, Going to Maine, which describes her life-changing experience on the Appalachian Trail. Hi, Sally. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
First off, I want to say how much I enjoyed reading your book. Like it was, a lot of these books, you kind of read them and, you don't really get involved. I felt like I was out on the trail with you and your gang of friends, and it was just a super fun read. And it's one of those things where I have to tell myself, okay, I got to go to sleep now, which is a good sign. If a book is keeping you up late, that's a good sign. It's a fun read.
That is, can I say, the highest compliment is that you were like, it's a fun read. I felt like I was there and that was my goal. So thank you so much. I'm just, I'm still in the phase. Like it doesn't officially come out until September 10th. So some people have read it, but it's not widely out. So I'm just still amazed when anybody has read it. I'm like, you read what I wrote? Amazing. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. I alluded to the Appalachian Trail. Not everyone knows what that is. So can you maybe just talk a little bit about what it is?
Sure. I mean, I live in Georgia, so and not everybody here knows what it is. So it's not, I think as hikers, we always think like, oh, of course, everybody knows this place that I love. And, so the Appalachian Trail is a hiking trail that goes from Georgia to Maine in the U.S. And it's around, depending on the year, it's around 21 to 2,200 miles. It's a very, people do it in one season, usually 5 to 6 months. And it's a pretty social trail. So it's not, can't go more than 3 or 4 days without passing a road. So it has that as opposed to some of the other long distance trails where you're definitely in the wilderness. The AT is pretty social, which was good for me.
So I found it really interesting how you decided to walk the AT. Most people, research it. They, it's like something they have to do and they're super knowledgeable. You were the exact opposite. Can you maybe tell the story about how you ended up walking the AT?
Yeah. So my best friend, Erin, who I hiked with, and we have been best friends since we were in 7th grade. Like we're like those girls, like she's my sister, we've been inseparable since 7th grade. And she and I and her sister had actually hiked the Long Trail, which is basically like it goes from the bottom of Vermont, from Massachusetts to the Canadian border a couple years earlier. And I was like, yeah, this is not for me. Like this, I loved the experience, but I was like, backpacking is not for me. But at the time I was maybe 2 years into a job right out of college. I kind of was at that point, where I think everybody kind of gets to that point where you're like, what am I doing with my life? What am I, am I going to stay here? Am I going to do something else? Like, what do I want from this? And Erin called me up and was like, I'm hiking the AT. And I don't think she even asked me to go with her. I think she just told me. And then I was like, great. And hung up and then just started thinking like, I want that. Like, I want that adventure. If I don't take this chance, I'm going to still be sitting here a year from now in this same, I was in a car, I was living in Chicago at the time, and I was, commuting back out to the suburbs and back in. And I was just like, I'm going to stagnate. And I feel myself doing that. And so I just, without, kind of the idea of what the trail was, just knowing that I wanted that adventure and I needed a change, I said yes. And I take that back. I didn't say yes. I just said, I'm coming with you. And she said yes.
I think it's interesting. A lot of people feel that way. Very few take action. And even fewer decide to spend 6 months doing something they didn't enjoy when they'd done it a couple years earlier. What do you think it's about you that, made you take action where there's so many people who kind of regret not doing what you did?
I think a couple things. One, I wholly trust Erin, and she's she is one of those people that when you meet her, you want to be around her. Like she's just a spark, and she's so fun. And so I wanted to do something with her. That was one thing. I think the other thing is that I'm an Air Force brat. And so I've kind of like grown up just like traveling and doing and, going from one place to the next. So I do have that wanderlust, even if it wasn't focused on backpacking before. So I think I'm more, I'm definitely more malleable. I'll take more chances. I'll go try a thing that I'm not good at. I think just from the experience I had so many new experiences growing up that it really made me kind of at ease. I'm not as afraid of change. I actually crave it. So I would say, if anything, I'm afraid of stagnating, which is sometimes now that I'm getting older, I'm like, oh, that's a problem on the other side, right? Like I should want to have roots and that kind of thing. So
in terms of the timing to walk the AT, what's the regular season that most people start and finish their walk?
So, I would say the regular hiking season starts like mid-March and goes so if you start if you go south to north, which is the way the majority of people do. Some people go north to south. They start in Maine and they'll start a little bit later in the summer. But if you go north or south to north, then Katahdin closes, which is the terminus. So that's the last mountain in Maine, closes in October. So you have to be done by then. So I would say most people start around mid-March, end sometime in August, maybe September. And I think maybe the majority of people hike about 6 months. We did it a little faster because we both had, Erin and I both were I was starting law school, she was starting med school. And so we actually started early. There was snow everywhere. But we started in February and we finished in mid-July. So yeah, we started a little bit earlier than most people, but I imagine the hiking season is probably getting a little earlier now because of global warming.
Yeah, definitely. I was wondering, being one of the earliest on the trail, how do you think that influenced your experience? You talked about how social it is and, you're always reconnect with people who are ahead of you or behind you. But in your case, there was almost nobody ahead of you. And I know at some places you'd be like, oh, you're the first thru hikers we've seen. You're the first women hikers we've seen. Do you think that changed your experience, irrespective of, obviously the weather and all the snow you had to deal with and all the rain early on?
Absolutely. I mean, I know, it's a very different trail for people that started even a month after us, where like they would get to shelters at night and it would be completely full. And that is definitely more of a party. And now even, we hiked a long time ago. So like now it's even more of a popular trail. So, we always were able to stop at a shelters. There were some nights where we were by ourselves. And I do think it made the people that we met and that we did connect with, we kind of formed even deeper connections because we were some of the few that were on the trail at that time. And yeah, it just made us very like fiercely like to hang on to those people that we really connected with, because there weren't just like an abundance of people on the trail at the same time we were. Of course, because that's the way I did it, that feels like it's the best way. But I'm sure that people who experience it with the crowds would say that is also probably amazing.
You did it, coming out of, your first job before going to grad school. But there's all types of people on the AT. Can you maybe describe, I know at one point in the book, you describe kind of like the types of people you meet, kind of the age groups. And I know some people are worried like, oh, I could never do a thru hike. I'm 50 or 60 years old. But I know here in Canada on the Great Divide Trail, there's people in their 70s who are doing these thru hikes. And in Europe, you see people in their 70s and 80s. So it is really accessible. But is the AT as accessible as these other hikes for, maybe people who aren't in their 20s and 30s?
I would say, we met kind of there were people who were either right out of college or still in college. And then you would have an age gap and it would be people who had just retired. And those were the two biggest groups. And so it's people who, either had the time right after school, which is kind of, we were a little bit in that like we felt like we were a little bit older than people because we were 24 and 25 rather than 23. But and then we were hiking with people who were like in their 50s and 60s. So I can see my husband and I both talk about like when we retire hiking another trail, and that is totally a goal. I mean, I'm sure, as I'm now in my 40s, I can see that like I would do it differently, than as a 24-year-old, but I would probably eat better food and have a pillow. But otherwise, it's a lot of just kind of like taking it slowly, building up your stamina, and then the mental game, which I think I would have in spades now than at in my 20s.
You mentioned earlier about the shelters each night. Can you maybe describe, what it's like in the shelters? I know you carried a tent as well for part of it, and there's also, staying in town, which some of the places didn't sound exceptional.
No,
but you maybe just describe like, if you're on a budget and try to do it kind of like the most authentic way, where are you going to stay each night?
So every about 8 to 10 miles on the AT, there are shelters, which, a lot of people you can hike, you can camp along the trail. Most places you can, just throw down wherever in the woods, but most people will aim for these shelters because they always have a water source. If you're there and you can get a shelter, they're like mostly 3-sided wooden structures, nothing fancy, just literally a shelter. But they're like, they'll have a fire ring and a picnic table, and they are generally where hikers will gather. And so, we would often like plan our stops depending on where the shelters are. And a lot of that is because, there's almost always going to be water at those. I mean, also for the social aspect, in every shelter, there's what's called a shelter register. So it's just like a notebook that through hikers like write in. And so you can tell like, oh, this person's like 3 days ahead of me. And now, I'll write something to the person behind me to tell them where I'm going to stop. And so, and all of those are free until you get into, I think the White Mountains is really the only place where you have to pay to stay. And, when we generally would go into town and stay at a hotel every couple of weeks. So, and it always pile like a whole bunch of people in. And the hostels were very, every once in a while there'd be hostels in a trail town, and those were fairly inexpensive. So I think it could be done as cheaply or as expensive. I mean, you could stay in towns all the time if you wanted, as you want. We had saved, this was 20 years ago, but I think we had each saved about $5,000 to do it and spent a little under 5 months, and came back with some money. So, and we were kind of, living high. Like compared to a lot of people who were like, oh, we can't do a hotel tonight. And we'd be like, come on.
You mentioned the hut register. And I remember when I was reading the book, I was thinking it's such kind of a charming little relic of the past, because people didn't, there were cell phones. They didn't work everywhere. I know here in the Canadian Rockies, most places cell phones don't work. We don't have these registers. But I imagine now a lot of these, little shelters now have cell phone service, and kind of that game of like, where are these people trying to figure things out? Do you think that's all been lost now that, you follow them on Instagram or whatever, and you can know, my friends are now in this town, and, you can message them and have that two-way conversation?
I think it's a very different experience. I think through hiking is probably a very different experience than when I did it. I, of course, feel like it's a shame that a lot of that is lost because, it was being really disconnected from the world, and really, we would have to go to libraries to log onto their laptop or their computers to email our friends like every few weeks. And, we would have to go to payphones, and we could only call a couple people to get updates. And if they weren't there, they weren't there. So, it really was a very, I think, just a different experience when we hiked. And I feel like I feel sad that some of that's lost. Like I said, we live in Georgia. And so I go up to the beginning, the first hike in Georgia on the AT a lot, and sometimes we'll see through hikers, and every once in a while they'll have like, the selfie sticks and they'll be vlogging as they're walking. And I just think like, okay, you know what? It's different. It's probably not that worse. It's just different, So, I think it's a bit of a shame, but that's probably very old person of me to say.
You mentioned being, disconnected, and I was really interested, and you kind of frame it around like how the trail's becoming all consuming, but there's a point in the book where you talk about not knowing the Iraq war had started, and kind of like this feeling of you're having this incredible experience, and you kind of forget that your friends are, getting married and living their own lives, which this is really common, not just on the AT, but I think on all big walks or even bike tours. Maybe describe a little bit more about, how that impacted you.
Yeah, I think it both, I think for me, having that, what I called, like we always called like the trail bubble, helped me stay out there, right? Because I wasn't, it wasn't the experience that you have where you're like, oh, I know what's going on at home. I'm missing this, I'm missing that. Like you got so hyper focused on what you were doing, and you didn't have any of those outside distractions, and you weren't even able to talk to people most of the time. And so for me, the disconnection was kind of necessary to finish. But it was often jarring, because every once in a while you would run up against real stuff. Like I said, like I was, had the experience of, so this was 2003 when we did our through hike, and I had a little armband radio that would every once in a while get a signal, every once in a while. And so I had, gotten like a new talk news channel, and I was hiking up, I got to a peak, and all of a sudden I could hear something, and they were talking about how the US had gone to war in Iraq. And I grew up in the military. My dad was in the Air Force. We moved all over. And, I just had a very like, oh, wow, like this is, it felt like it was happening somewhere else. Like it felt like I was not even a part of, like it was happening in another country to somebody else. Like I couldn't even really like connect the emotions to it. And, the times when we got off the trail, like we got off the trail to go to a wedding, and that was like a weird reentry, to like go to the wedding and then get back out on the trail. Like it kind of popped the trail bubble a little bit. And so, so for me, I think the bubble is kind of necessary, because you're doing this thing that is both wonderful and beautiful, but so hard mentally and physically that you kind of have to have tunnel vision to get to the end.
It's also something that it's so personal and so hard, but then kind of no one else cares. Like I think, when I've done through hikes, it's like, oh, you were gone for, 8 weeks and you're back now. And I think it's what's interesting is it's so powerful. It's such a big part of your life. But for other people, it's like you went, to Disneyland for a month, probably less interesting than that.
Yes. No, I mean, yeah, I think you're exactly right. And you think about it even now, like where I'm sure people now like, oh, their friends are hiking, and so they can keep in touch and they're on Instagram and they can see their pictures. But like, we literally just like, were gone and then came back in the summer a lot thinner and, more grizzly. And it had like, something that was so impactful that I'm still talking about it 20 years later. and they just were going on their normal lives. So yeah, it's a weird disconnect, and it really bonds you to people who have done it, because they understand like, oh, you had a life-changing experience. I kind of think of it as like with parenthood, I mean, you can't quite grasp, no matter what, like until you've like been there, then you're like, oh, I get it. That being, you're up all night, that's awful. And I really understand what that actually means, versus just kind of like a peripheral, an outsider's view.
Your book talks, there's a lot of emotion in it, and both with you and with your hiking buddies. And what do you think it is about like a through hike that have, regular people that don't start bawling, all of a sudden start bawling for kind of no reason? And it's like, it's not just you and your friends, it's kind of common. Yeah. You have these huge emotional reactions for things that are, walking it into town after a hard day. Sometimes people just break down. What do you think draws all this emotion out?
I think that it is, you're just so tired, both physically and emotionally, that there just isn't there's just no filter anymore, right? You don't have the ability to like mask those emotions and to like, in most everyday life, we have like the reserves to not break down like a toddler when we're upset, or to like, we can stop ourselves from a lot of things, and we tamp down our joy and we tamp down, like the disappointment. And I think when you're just like always exhausted, that it is so much harder to do that. I also think it's the like, you're never comfortable. You are always like, you're always in a new place. You're always physically uncomfortable, no matter how good a shape you're in, right? And I think that those things just keep you kind of off balance. And so everything just floats to the top. And I think I found it to be really liberating, because I think I was doing a lot of, this is how I should be, this is how I'm supposed to act, kind of in my post-college years. And the trail just stripped me of all that. And I was like, well, I don't have the energy or the time to pretend or to be anybody else but me. So do you find that too?
Yeah. It's there's also something, I think, when you're around other people a lot and you're walking, you get really deep into conversations. And
yes,
first off, it's not non-confrontational. You're side by side. You also don't really have much to talk about. So you'll talk about whatever you'll see, but then you might get onto a really deep topic that you're kind of like not even really paying attention. So your mind isn't filtering, and you're having these like really deep conversations with people. And I keep in touch with people I did trips with 25 years ago still. And I have friends I lived with in university that I don't keep in touch with, but it's a different relationship. Going out drinking beers or going to, sporting events, it's very shallow, whereas I find on the trail, it's really deep. And that's especially if it's somebody like you went with your best friend. Mm-hmm. And there's another spoiler I don't want to go into because I think it's a really fun part of the book. But, I think that's really fun. But I've also seen relationships crumble on difficult trips because you kind of lose those guardrails, and all of a sudden people become a bit more who they are. And, maybe you can talk a little bit about kind of friendships and the friends you made, because I think it's really interesting. You're still connected to these people. You're still, going to each other's weddings. And a lot of people don't have these relationships 25 years down the line for people they knew really well, as opposed to people they just hiked with off and on for 4 or 5 months.
It is very funny because, I think of, I actually just this summer went to visit a friend who we hiked with, one of the guys, Pilgrim, and his wife, and another friend, like his friend. We spent a week with them and their kids and my kid, and and just had. It was just like we haven't missed a beat. The friendships are that deep, because when do you ever spend that much time with someone in a context where, like you said, you're just walking with someone and you're getting to know them, and you are seeing them at their absolute best and their absolute worst, and you're at your absolute best and your absolute worst, and everybody just kind of accepts that mostly. I feel so privileged to have my friends still from the trail. It is such an important touchstone in my life, because it has kept me in that, it reminds me of hey, you were this really cool, audacious person, and you can do really hard things that you didn't think you could do. And that has carried me. And I like that they know me as that. And so it makes me feel like that. So I think that we kind of keep that for each other. But yeah, I'm still super tight with people I hiked with. And yeah, it's 20 years ago. So I just feel very lucky. I think it's such a beautiful thing. It's like the friends you meet at summer camp,
You talked about doing hard things. And I think one thing, kind of all active travel, whether you're walking the last week of the Camino or you're walking around the world, you learn to deal with adversity and pain. And you kind of prove to yourself, hey, I can get through this. And there's a part early in the book where you hurt your knee and you realize I kind of got no choice.
Yeah.
Like I'm in the middle of nowhere. And I think there's something really powerful in terms of our own self-esteem. But I've never heard kind of people say, oh, you can do hard things. Do you think that's unique to you, this ability of dealing with adversity, being more confident? Or did you see that in your friend Erin and with other friends you hiked with on the AT?
I think that I definitely took a lot of my strength from Erin. She is one of those people that is just, she will not back down from anything. Her like when something is hard, her instinct is to like run right through it. Whereas I'm like, I don't know. But I just, for me in the beginning, I was very hard. I was very out of shape. I had like injured myself months earlier and kind of gotten really out of shape. And it was hard physically. And I just was really uncomfortable and I wasn't I wasn't outdoorsy. So, I found a lot of my strength from her. And I think as I went on, I found it within myself. And that was, I don't know if it was a surprise, but I definitely surprised myself by it was one of those things that I learned like, oh, if I just keep going, it's no bigger like illustration than hiking a long trail than like, if you literally just keep putting one foot in front of the other, you'll eventually make it. And that has carried me through so many things in my life since the trail is just like, oh, you can do harder things than you think. Because I did not, I was ready to quit in the beginning.
At the start of the trail, you were focused on, you had a plan, you had mileage, you had places you have to be. And, there's always this talk of hiking your own hike. So you would leave these friends you'd made because you had a schedule. And by the end, you were going slower. Your friend Erin had injured herself and your friends all of a sudden all changed their hike and you guys all kind of compromised to doing it together and kind of like hike your own hike, change from what was best for you two to like this wider group. How did this change? Like, at what point did you realize, oh, this schedule is, if we hit it or we don't hit it, we don't care. We're just going to do what feels right.
I think that we got to know these people better and we realized, you get to a point in kind of those long hikes where the hiking and it takes a lot to be like impressed by something that you see during the day. It's like every once in a while you'll be like, oh, that is a cool mountain, or yeah, I'm really glad I did that. But it's like, it's your everyday life. It's a bit of a job. And so what you realize is important is the people you're surrounded with. And if that's, yourself, then it's like having this relationship with yourself, but having these relationships became, I think, more important than the nature and the schedule. And I think we finally all kind of got to the point where we were like, okay, we love each other. We want to finish this together. And then we have to make it a priority. And, it was hard to kind of admit because everybody goes into it with this mentality of hike your own hike and we're not going to stop for anyone else. And we had to finish by a certain point. We had to be done because we were starting school. So we had to be done by like mid-July. So that was kind of our mentality in the beginning, is like, we have to be kind of quicker than most people. But it really became clear probably like 2/3 of the way through that like the people were actually what was important. So I'm glad that we made that change because, we met people who were just hiking for speed. And while that is like a total laudable goal, and I wish that was something I could do. I've never been fast, but I also, I just, I got so much more out of it just from the people and experiencing those things with those people, like being in those places with those people. Standing on top of a mountain by yourself can feel a little empty, amazing, but empty. Now as a parent, I'm like, anytime alone, amazing.
and so it's kind of bittersweet. You all finished, the AT, you go to a friend's cabin for the night. and then everyone scatters. And in our lives, we kind of don't have that very often. You know, if you think, you know, university, there's always some people, you know, that are going to where you're going, or, you know, they'll stay in the city, or, you know, it's very rare you make these tight bonds and then just rip them all off all at the same time. You know, how did you deal with that? Because, you know, there's a big aspect of kind of depression after these big trips. Not only have you lost the activity, but you've also lost these great friends.
It was a rough reentry. It was rough. I was lucky that I had something very specific that I was going back to. Like, I was going back to start law school. And so I had all of these tasks. I had to find a place. I had to, you know, get registered. I had to like do all of these things. And that just were distracting. And, but it was hard. It was really felt very, you know, a lot of things felt very flat. And I didn't, you know, I was like, I understand why people just will hike a trail and then turn around and hike back. Like, I get it. And I think I was also very lucky that the group of people we were with, which was mostly men, they were 23-year-olds, but they were, you know, evolved and communicative, and were willing to, like, you know, let's email, let's do phone calls, let's make a priority to visit. And they were really put some work into like staying in touch, even though we all scattered. And we have, you know, been better at times about being in touch and worse at times, but we have never like let each other go. And it was hard.
So what you wrote, you walked the AT to escape the narrow life you felt fated to live, as you write. You went to law school, and your life has kind of not gone as one would expect. How did the AT impact like what you're doing now, which is kind of totally different from what you'd expect someone that goes to law school would be doing?
I think it opened it gave me perspective, and it opened up my possibilities. I really did feel like, okay, I went to college, let me get a job, and then I'll get married, and then I'll have kids. And I just was like, it never felt right to me. It never sat with me. I just, and I do have, I am those things now, right? I do have a job and a kid and a husband and all those things, but like, I just didn't want that to be I didn't want it to be scripted, and I wanted to be able to have a choice and to be able to like zig and zag, which is what I've basically done my whole life. And I think that like having the trail of like, oh, look, I took a zig and look at what this brought me. Let's see if I do it again, what will this happen? You know, also having a partner who was like, hey, you're miserable being a lawyer, you should do something that you love, you know, has also been very helpful. So yeah, I mean, now I'm doing, you know, I'm a comedian and do a podcast and, you know, wrote a book, and I feel like more free and more capable to like take those chances and try things out, even if I don't know how they're going to turn out, because, you know, why not?
You know, one thing, having done now, this is episode 180. I don't know if it'll air 180th, but I hear again, people, they feel after doing big trips, kind of a willingness to be more authentic and living a life that is right for them. And as you said, maybe stepping away from, you know, go to school, get a job, become a lawyer, make a lot of money, get married. You know, that's a great life, but it's not, you know, it's not the right life for everybody. I feel people who have done these big trips just have that confidence just to say, okay, I now kind of know what I want to do.
Yeah.
And going from being a lawyer to a comedian and successful podcast host and an author is, that's a big change.
It's a big change, but it does, I think you're right. I think it like what I always say, like people are like, oh, are you a different person after the AT? And I'm like, not necessarily. I think I'm more authentically myself. I think I have a better perspective on what's important to me and what I value. And I am more sure of that. I was more sure of that. And I grow more sure of that, I think, as I get older too, rather than like what is expected of me or what I think people want of me. And I think that, it just is once you've tasted it, it's hard to go back. Once you've like, peeked around the corner of what's possible and see what your life could be. And like, my partner and I, husband and I, we prioritize experience, and we've moved around a lot because we wanted to have those experiences. We've lived abroad. We've done lots of trails. Money is not the thing for us. And we're never going to like make choices in our lives solely dependent on that. Not that we're not living in a capitalist society, but we are able to, just some other things feel more important for sure.
I love the way you described peeked around the corner to see what's possible. And it is kind of once you realize, oh wait, yeah, like a nice car and big house and a big TV, I think that's what I want, but hang on. Going and roughing it in Nepal or Peru or wherever is actually way better. And so much, gives me so much more happiness. Then it is hard. It's like, well, I don't actually want any of that stuff. I actually want to spend more time roughing it and doing this with the people I love. Which is, a great way to live if you're that way inclined, I think.
Yeah, I would 100% rather be in a tent with my friends and having a new experience than, have a big TV. That feels, and not that you can't also have those things. You can also have a big TV, but it just doesn't, have, it's a little empty for me.
Sally, I want to thank you for coming on the show today. It's great to chat with you. Again, I love the book. If people want to find you, catch your comedy, find your podcast, figure out where to buy the book, where can they do all this?
Two places where I would say the easiest places to find me are my website, which is sallychaffinbrooks.com. You can find links to everything there. Or I post regularly on Instagram, and it's at the Sally Brooks.
I'll put links to both of those in the show notes. I'm also going to put a link to, is it best if people want to buy the book to buy it on Amazon? Is it, better to buy it on your website or somewhere else, or is it the same no matter where they go?
It's the same no matter where you go. I mean, I always encourage people, if you want a physical copy, to buy it on bookshop.org or buy it from your local bookseller. I was going to say, I don't know what's better in Canada, but Amazon, you can find it on Amazon, Target. You could order it from your local bookstore, and it's available. It's going to be available in ebook. It is available in ebook, in paperback, and it will be available in audiobook soon.
Go into your local bookstore. There's very few left. They're a ton of fun. I haven't been to the one.
Take a trip.
They've totally redone the one I used to go to here in Calgary, and it's become like going into a library in Hogwarts. There's books all the way to the ceiling. They probably got 10 times the stock, and my family spent an hour there. We're like, this is so much better than buying it online.
You're like,
helping
I forgot
business.
The joy of touching
and those
books.
little recommendations they give where it's like, Jim likes this, Jenny likes this. That's the best way to find new books as well. So
that's my dream, is to have somebody write a little recommendation for my book. That is my next goal. If there are any booksellers listening, please fulfill my dreams.
Oh, that's so much fun. With that, thanks to everyone for listening to this episode of the 10 Adventures podcast. We'll be back next week to explore the world and hear about more epic adventures. Bye-bye. Start planning your own adventure by visiting us at 10adventures.com and listen to other episodes of the 10 Adventures podcast on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you find your podcasts.